been asked this weekend.
While we were, that was a good question. While we were here at Lancaster Methodist Church this afternoon, some of the young people asked questions. One of them asked, does Tom like olives on his pizza or not?
No, definitely
And
not.
he said no, actually. So, so yeah, there've been some good questions. Now here you see Becca's straight in there, Becca and Zoe. In the last few months, did you catch that? In the last few months of youth presidency, where have you seen God at work in the church? Good question.
So where have I seen God at work? In my role as the youth president, I'm on quite a lot of committees and decision-making bodies, and there are some really exciting things going through our structures at the minute. So there's some work that has been passed on young adults, and that's really exciting that we're really putting some effort into that at the minute, and the different ways that our children and young people are actually excited about how they can get involved in church and exploring how they can have a vocation in church, whether that be actually working for the church or just volunteering at their church, and also taking the gospel out into the streets where they live. And that's where I've seen God working recently.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you. That's a great question. Do put some other questions down if you've got any, or if it's easier for you, just want to wave at us and unmute yourself, you can ask a question that way. But let me just recap what we've done with Tom, because he must be exhausted by now. He arrived yesterday lunchtime and he came on the train from Grimsby.
Indeed, I did.
And we took him first of all to the drive in the Blackpool and Southfield circuit, where we had fish and chips with some young people from the Northfield circuit and the Blackpool and Southfield circuit. And then we whisked him off to Leyland in the Chorley and Leyland circuit, where there was a gathering of young people from lots of different places, including a great group that came across from Oldham to join us for the afternoon. And they had workshops during the afternoon, and their leaders had some very special training and support work from the Learning Network, and we shared food together and shared some worship together. So that was a really great event yesterday. We let him have some sleep last night, but not too much, because he was on the radio at 8:30 this morning on BBC Radio Lancashire, which is now local radio on a Sunday morning. It's not just Lancashire, it's Cumbria, Merseyside and Manchester. So it's a bit like our district amalgamation. Tom was speaking to the whole of the northwest of England this morning at 8:30. I was at 7:45 actually. I gave a little bit of a message for Palm Sunday, and then Tom had quite a lot of questions from Joe this morning. Joe Wilson questioned him for longer than I thought he might. And I've noticed, Tom, actually, one or two people have said you were really grilled by him. Really asked you some tough questions. But that breakfast show this morning is obviously recorded, and we've put the link to it on our Lancashire Methodist District Facebook page, and we'll probably send it out via email with the district prayers tomorrow morning. So you'll be able to catch up on that if you've missed it. Then we came across to Beverley and Howell's place in Clitheroe and spent the morning at Clitheroe Methodist Church, where you went out and spent time with the young people there. Then we went back to Preston Ribble and to Hope Methodist Church, where we had lasagna and had some fun with the young people there. And finally, here to Lancaster for a Palm Sunday all-age worship at 4 o'clock, then food, then time with the young people, and now here on our district Zoom service. So he's done a lot of miles this weekend and a lot of activity over the weekend. Is there anybody who would like to ask Tom a question before we share our Bible reading and some thoughts about Palm Sunday? That was a great question from Becca and Zoe. Anything else that you might like to ask the youth president? Cass, brilliant. Unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. Just a quick one, Tom. What sort of music are you going to take up when you pass through?
So when I go to the Royal Northern, I will be studying pop music. So it's a 4-year degree, and it's a bit unusual because I'll be studying the trumpet on a pop music course. Yeah. But it's a bit unusual, but they don't have many people doing that. But with the joy with that is that I could make the course how I want it and get out of it what I'd like. So there'll be bits of production in there, so the tech side of music, but also a bit of composition and learning about how I can actually make a living out of being a musician. So marketing yourself well and all that kind of fun stuff.
Good question, that, Cass. Thank you very much.
Can I ask one while we're there?
Of course, Barbara, go on.
What decided you to want to be a youth leader?
Okay, so I had felt a bit of a calling for something and I didn't really know what it was. And I've got quite a pushy congregation at my home church, and they were like, well, Tom, why don't you go and have a look at that? So I was like, all right. So I had a bit of an experience, and I wasn't convinced that going to university was the right option at that point. So I thought, actually, I can use it as a staller as well to work out whether university was the right option. And then as I've come through discerning what was right, the call to the youth presidency came even stronger and stronger. So yeah, and here I am, and feeling the call every day that I wake up and just enjoying doing what I do. So it's brilliant.
That's well done.
That's really wonderful.
Thank you, Barbara and Cass. Tom is a member of the Methodist Youth Brass Band.
Yes.
Where he plays his trumpet. And when we were at the drive yesterday, Stuart Wilde, who's the superintendent minister, reminded us that the Methodist Youth Brass Band are booked to be at Lytham Methodist Church sometime next year.
It's February next year.
Say late spring, late winter, early spring next year. So we'll need to make sure that's publicised well across the district, because it'd be great to have Lytham Methodist Church full of people from across the district for the Methodist Youth Brass Band when they visit us early 2025. Goodness me. Anybody else with a question to ask Tom before we? Peter, that's lovely. Unmute yourself, Peter, and let's see what you have to ask.
Hi, Thomas. What's the emblem on your front? Have you?
Oh, now this is an intro. It's a Mickey Mouse jumper, and there's a really interesting story behind this. This jumper's older than I am. It was my mum's, and I happened to find, when we moved house, happened to find it, and I was like, I've never seen you wear that, Mum, so I pinched it off her. So it now lives in my wardrobe. I think it's about 30 years old, is this jumper. So it's still going strong.
Good question, Peter. Yesterday you were wearing your youth president hoodie.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you show people your bling?
Yeah,
if you become a president or a vice president in the Methodist Church, you have a special cross, and there is a special cross that the youth president gets. So just say a word about your cross.
When I was inducted as the youth president, there's a special service and some special liturgy that happens, and that receives me into being the youth president of the Methodist Church in Britain. And as part of that, there is the youth president cross, and there's also the youth president Bible, which gets passed down each youth president, and there's a really lovely message inside the front of the Bible from each youth president. It might be a Bible verse that they felt was on their hearts, or just a small little message. So I will really enjoy in August writing my little note in the front.
That's lovely, that. So you really get the sense that the presidency is passed from one year to another, and you're kind of in a line of succession of youth presidents. Thank you. Well, if you do think of any other questions, by all means put them in the chat, and we'll pick them up before the end of the service. Undoubtedly, in your church this morning, you'll have heard the story, or you'll have seen it enacted out by Zoe dressed as was it Miriam? Yeah. And maybe you had children helping to act it out, or you had visuals on the screen. It's a day of celebration, it's a day of proclamation, and the crowds gathered and they welcomed Jesus as he journeyed into Jerusalem, and they shouted, "Hosanna, save us, Lord, save us now." But we know that within a short space of time, all those hopes and expectations of the revolution that Jesus was going to bring were not the kind of king, were not the kind of revolution that seems to happen as the week goes on. I guess we all imagine that some of the people in that crowd shouting Hosanna on Sunday, by Thursday night, Friday, are shouting, "Crucify, put an end to this man," because these hopes and expectations we had have been dashed. The triumphal entry into Jerusalem appears in all four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, with slightly different bits added or bits not included. And this evening, I've asked Tom to share some words from Luke's Gospel. In Luke's Gospel, Jesus has the triumphant entry into Jerusalem, but there's a point at which he stops and he looks over Jerusalem and he weeps. And there are not many occasions I stop to think about Jesus weeping, Jesus actually crying. And he says some words that I think we need to hear Tom read to us tonight. He then goes to the temple and turns the tables in the temple. And we see Jesus at his angriest at the injustices that divide people in the temple courtyards and prevent people getting real access to God. It's an issue of justice for him, justice seeking Jesus. So we're moving quickly from the crowds shouting Hosanna to this moment where Jesus stops and looks over Jerusalem and weeps and says some words. I'm going to ask Tom if he would read for us from Luke's Gospel, and we'll hear the words and then we'll just be quiet together for a few moments. And I wonder how you picture Jesus weeping tonight. What view, what situation in the world, what circumstances might you picture Jesus weeping over tonight?
So, as Phil has said, this is from Luke's Gospel, and it's Luke chapter 19, and I'm starting at verse 41 and go through to verse 44. As he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it and said, "If you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace. But now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you."
Thank you, Tom. Let's just be quiet together for a few moments and imagine Jesus weeping over Jerusalem. And I wonder how Jesus weeps when he looks at our world tonight. Friends, our journey through Lent this year has taken us through the 5 principles, or 5 priorities rather, of a justice-seeking church. So we've thought about tackling inequality and poverty as one of the priorities. The second priority is enabling a flourishing environment, and you might remember that Garrow spent an evening with us thinking about the impact of climate change on the developing world, particularly island communities and Papua New Guinea especially. Thirdly, seeking justice for refugees, one people, one world, those who have had to flee from persecution and war and are seeking a better life somewhere else. Fourthly, opposing discrimination, remembering the evening that Zoe led for us on tackling discrimination. And that was really, really helpful with Zoe's insight. And then pursuing peace, the fifth priority, which is around seeking justice and reconciliation. Right at the beginning of our journey, we were speaking with Volodymyr over in Lviv in Ukraine about the anniversary, the second anniversary of the Russian invasion, and how you pray for peace and work for peace in a land that's been invaded by its big neighbour. So we've had quite a journey through the justice-seeking church material. And I know that this has been a priority work, Tom, for our young people. And often our young people, this was a question that Joe asked you on the radio this morning, often our young people are very passionate about justice and inequalities. Tom, as you've travelled around the country, as you've engaged with some of our young people this weekend, and you look at those 5 priority areas, which are the areas that you think young people particularly get passionate about and would help us think through?
I think that that the second priority of enabling a flourishing environment is particularly on people's hearts at the minute, as we explore what being a net zero church looks like, and exploring how we can care for the environment that God's given to us. And I think that in itself relates to the other principles or the priorities, sorry, for justice that are listed. Tackling inequality and poverty is on children and young people's heart. They see, particularly at the minute, homelessness, and worry about where the church sits within poverty and what we should be doing. But all of the priorities for justice are being spoken about within children and young people, as there's just a want for harmony in the world, whether that be peace or harmony with humans and the environment, or just wiping out any kind of discrimination. There's just a real want from our children and people to live out those priorities for justice.
And Tom, one of the big pieces of work for the Methodist Church is 3Generate, our annual gathering of children and young people. Becca, I know, has been a volunteer at 3Gen, so I wonder whether Becca might want to say something in a moment, because I noticed when I've been at 3Gen, there's quite a lot of space for young people to talk about their hopes for the future, for making the world a better place, for tackling inequalities and injustices, for climate justice, etc. Becca has unmuted. See, that's really, really good. Becca, you were, I think this last year, you were in the Hope and Anchor venue, which did provide a lot of space for conversations, didn't it? So as you look at the justice-seeking church, did you find it easy to have conversations with young people? And what were some of their conversations with you like on those themes?
Yeah, it was a really wonderful venue to be working in as part of the wider 3Generate. And I was really bowled over by some of the mature responses we get from our young people, just because sometimes you sort of think, oh, children, you can sort of, it feels like sometimes, oh, they have such a superficial sort of faith, or it's not that deep, but actually there's lots of justice issues particularly that they really care about. As Tom was saying, the environment came up quite often, and sort of wanting to encourage us as churches to do more, because they thought that our churches are not doing enough about that. It's some really passionate responses about that. We were tasked with asking them questions, and I said, right, what are you going to change when you get back from Regenerate? And lots of those were around justice issues, or tackling discrimination as well came up quite a lot. So treating people equally and fairness was important. So neurodivergent people, people with different sexuality and things, that like they wanted those to be welcome in churches too.
Brilliant. Thank you, Becca. And thank you for your volunteering and being part of things. It's a joy to be involved.
Well, I was going to say, I think I possibly got, if not as much as the young people, possibly got more than them. I found it quite a spiritual experience for myself as well. So quick plug here, if any of you want to volunteer for Regenerate, they're after more volunteers. Just either get in touch with myself, or I'm sure Phil could direct you to volunteering for Regenerate. There's so many different ways, and it's wonderful, honestly. Like it's one of the jewels in our church's crown, so to speak. It's a really wonderful thing, and I'd encourage anyone to see if they can use their gifts and talents to help and encourage our young people.
Thank you, Becca. So we need some of our younger adults like Becca. We need some of our older adults like me. I was volunteering at 3Gen, and like Becca says, I found it a spiritually uplifting experience. I'm very proud that we take quite a significant group of people from across the Lancashire district to 3Gen, and we've been working hard this weekend to promote it with groups who've not yet been, and to make sure we grow that number of young people that go along to Regenerate this year. Let's just return to the Bible passage, because we're going to move into a time of prayer shortly. As I said to you, there are moments in the Gospels where we see the real humanity of Jesus. And this is one where I imagine him coming down and seeing Jerusalem ahead of him, knowing not only what the coming days, which we call Holy Week, are going to mean for him personally, but also seeing a time when Jerusalem is going to be encircled and attacked, and it's going to be defeated. He could see a time when Jerusalem was going to be destroyed, and children injured and maimed and killed. And the emotion of that just hits Jesus. And Luke tells us that he weeps at the roadside, and kind of says to the crowds that are still with him, if only you knew the devastation that was coming. And I must admit, when I read that in preparation for tonight, I could picture the devastation in Israel, yes, but especially in Gaza at the moment. Whole cities and towns destroyed, rubble everywhere, people displaced, and many, many people killed. And I just imagine Jesus looking over at that portion of the Holy Land and really weeping today. If only you knew the devastation and the damage. And whether it's climate, the climate crisis, or it's refugees fleeing and making dangerous journeys over treacherous waters, and many losing their life trying to find a safe place. Whether in our own communities, it's people who've fallen through the gaps and are really, really struggling in extreme poverty. All of these areas that we've been looking at in justice seeking might be areas that Jesus pauses, looks over our towns and our cities and our neighborhoods and our communities, and weeps at the pain and the suffering and the injustice. He goes on then to do something about it when he enters the temple, and he gives us an example of what tackling injustice looks like. It sometimes does involve overturning tables and driving out practices that are divisive and unjust practices. It involves action as well as prayer, and grieving and mourning and weeping and crying. And we're challenged, aren't we, in our justice-seeking church to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. What kind of godly action we will be called to as we continue to seek to be justice seeking